Coffee cake hands, caffeinated hands. Hi bakers, I'm Kye, and today is all about classic version of coffee cake, putting our own spin on it to make sure it is so delicious and a little bit of a new take on it. It's the cinnamon crisp coffee cake. The first thing we're going to do is prepare the pan. And so that way when our batter is ready, everything can just go right into the pan, straight into the oven without much delay. So you can use an 8-inch square pan or a 9-inch round, whatever your preference. And we're going to line it with parchment. And that will make getting the coffee cake out of the pan really easy without losing any of the top. This is especially easy if you're using a square pan. So we're going to start with a half sheet of parchment, and we're going to trim it so that it's about 8 inches across, and then leave some extra parchment on the ends that we can use like handles. And then make sure it fits snugly into your pan, and make some creases along the bottom and along the top edge so that it stays nice and flat. And you can tuck the little wings in if you want, if that's easier, or you can just leave them to the side like this, and we'll use them for handles, lifting the coffee cake out later. Now I'm going to lightly grease the sides of the pan that don't have parchment on them with a little bit of nonstick spray. Perfect. I'll set this aside and we can start our mix. Now we're going to mix the filling, which is going to give us that beautiful ribbon through the middle of the cake layers that's cinnamony, and it has a little cocoa in it, which makes it fudgy and visually it pops. And it's pretty simple. All you have to do is just mix the 3 ingredients together in a small bowl. So this is 1/3 cup of granulated sugar, 66 grams. I'll add 2 teaspoons of Vietnamese cinnamon, and then lastly, 2 tablespoons of cocoa. You can use a Dutch process or a natural, whatever you have on hand is fine. I'm using our triple cocoa blend, which is perfect because it's all I need in my pantry. You can use it for recipes that call for natural or Dutch. Once your filling is combined, you can set it aside and we will make our crumbs. Now we're going to make the crumbs for the topping, which are really the star of the show for this coffee cake. So it starts with good old-fashioned King Arthur all-purpose flour. It's 1 cup or 120 grams. Then I'm going to add our granulated sugar and our confectioner sugar. And the reason why we're using 2 kinds of sugar here is, one, to get balanced levels of sweetness, but the confectioner sugar has cornstarch in it, just a little bit, and that helps with the crispiness, so the crumbs become ever so slightly crunchy as they bake. We really love that texture that comes from using 2 kinds of sugar. So I'm adding 2 teaspoons cinnamon to get a really nice flavor. Then I'll add 1/4 teaspoon of salt, which helps with just rounding out the flavor, make sure everything's balanced, and then I will stir together all the dry ingredients. Okay, now it's time for the butter and vanilla extract. I'm going to add this room temperature butter. It's nice and soft. It's not melting at all, but it feels malleable with my fingertips. This is 85 grams of unsalted butter into the crumbs. And I'm also going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now you get to dive in using your tool of choice. I really like starting with a bowl scraper because I can kind of chop the butter up into smaller pieces and work it into the flour, but you can also use a fork, you could use a pastry cutter. If you really had to, you could use a stand mixer very briefly, but I'll start with a dough scraper. Now I'm going to get into this crumb topping with my hands to break up any of the bigger pieces of butter, just kind of work it into the flour until we have crumbs that are about the size of peas to walnuts. So not too big. You also want them to be kind of irregular in size because that gives you that great kind of craggly texture on the top of the coffee cake. Okay, so our crumbs look great. There are no dry floury bits, but there are clumps that range in size. A quick tip is if you shake your bowl briefly, the biggest crumbs will come to the top, so you can just check out the size, make sure there's no big clumps, make sure the bottom doesn't have any dry bits, and then you can set these aside while we prepare the batter. So the method we're using to mix together this batter is maybe a little bit new to you. This is called reverse creaming, or is also known as the paste method. So with reverse creaming, you mix your dry ingredients and then you add your room temperature butter to it and mix that together, and it forms almost a paste. It coats the flour in fat, and that prevents as much gluten from forming. So rather than getting a cake with a little bit of chew, you get this super tender, really moist cake that's difficult to overmix. It's really fail-proof method, and I'll show you what it looks like here. So we're adding our room temperature butter that's cut into cubes. It's easier if you cut your butter into cubes when it's still cold. It makes it easier to handle. So let's do some reverse creaming. So we want to mix this until it looks like it has a paste-like consistency and everything is thoroughly blended. If you notice any butter chunks on the side, you can stop the mixer, scrape it down, and then just let it keep going until everything looks nice and smooth. It might look a little crumbly at this point too. That's okay. It'll quickly become a paste as soon as we add a little liquid. So the mixture looks evenly crumbly. I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, just again for that backbone of flavor, as well as 2 large eggs. So if you saw this, you might think it looks more like cookie dough or maybe even the start of enriched bread dough rather than cake batter. That's okay. It should look really thick at this point. We haven't added the liquid yet. So periodically take a moment to scrape down the sides. Make sure you scrape down the paddle attachment as well, also known as the flat beater attachment. So make sure that everything is thoroughly combined. This recipe is really awesome because it uses either buttermilk or Greek yogurt. So if you're the kind of baker that always has Greek yogurt on hand, use that. Otherwise, use buttermilk. If you're using buttermilk, you're going to turn on your mixer and slowly stream it into the batter. If you're using yogurt, you can add the yogurt all at once at this stage and then mix to combine. So I stopped the mixer and scraped down the sides and the attachment, and I'll let it mix just for about 30 seconds more until the batter looks smooth. If there are any lumps, you can turn it to a medium speed briefly just to make sure that it's really smooth. This looks beautiful. Now it's time to assemble the coffee cake. We'll use our filling, the crumbs, and it'll go into the oven. I like to be precise about how much batter goes into each layer to ensure that the filling is right in the middle. You can just eyeball about half if you're not a perfectionist. I will be measuring it. So half the batter is about 1.5 cups or 420 grams. So you can put your pan on the scale and measure it out. It's helpful if you spread the batter out a bit while you're measuring so that you don't have to spread it as much after. An amazing tool, one of my favorite tools actually to have in the kitchen, is a small offset spatula. It's really handy in a lot of cases, and this is definitely one of them. So use an offset spatula, or you can use the back of a spoon to spread the batter all the way from the edges to the corners, to the middle. Make sure the batter is even, that there's no excess in the middle. And you can shake it a little bit, make sure that it's all even. Once your first layer of batter is evenly in the pan, it's time to add the filling. So we'll sprinkle the filling evenly over and make sure that you cover the whole thing, because the filling will actually poke through just a little bit on the sides of the coffee cake so that you can tell it has this beautiful filling even when it's whole and hasn't been sliced yet. It'll look like a lot of filling, but we want this much to give that color, texture, and great flavor. Okay, filling looks good. It's sprinkled evenly over the first layer of batter. We have our second half still in the bowl. And if you are working with batter that was made with Greek yogurt, it's going to be a little bit thicker than this version since I used buttermilk. You might want to use a scoop to portion out this top layer, because then you can put scoops in each corner and then a dollop in the middle, and it's much easier to spread. I will show you what it looks like if you're using buttermilk. We'll still attempt to put batter in each of the corners and then the middle, and then just make spreading a little bit easier. Some in this corner, some in that corner, some in that corner, and then the back here. And then just kind of evenly portion it over the top. So then use the back of a spatula or an offset or a spoon to spread out this top layer. At this point, take a deep breath, don't panic. It's the potentially trickiest moment of the recipe, but it just requires confidence. Just spread it using a little bit of pressure back and forth, and it will be enough batter. Now it is time to add our crumbs, and one of my favorite things about this recipe is the amount of topping. It's super generous, so just use your hands to evenly distribute the topping over the batter. Make sure that you get it all the way to the corners, and you'll see what I mean when you start sprinkling it on, that there's a lot of topping. So the crumbs are evenly distributed over the batter, and then I'm just going to use my hands to gently press down on the crumbs to help adhere them slightly. You don't really want to press them into the batter, but this is just helping them form a little bit of a solid layer so that not as many will fall off when you're cutting it, because you don't want to lose any of that deliciousness. So just a gentle press, and then this can go into your preheated oven until it's tall and golden brown, and test done with a toothpick. I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Our cinnamon crisp coffee cake is out of the oven. It looks beautiful. It smells like a bakery in here. And so there are a couple signs you can check for to see if it's fully baked. First is the color. It should be this lovely golden brown. The crumbs around the exterior will just start to turn a little bit darker than the center. If you use a paring knife or a toothpick, you can insert it into the cake and check for doneness just like you would any other cake. Insert it and then look at the knife, and it should be mostly clean. It shouldn't have any wet batter sticking to it. Just a couple of crumbs is just fine. So this looks perfectly baked. So let the coffee cake cool in the pan for about 20 minutes, which will allow the cake's structure to set, and the cake won't be quite so fragile once you move it out of the pan. So now I will use the extra parchment paper as handles and just kind of make sure the cake feels loose, and then swiftly pull up and evenly and move it to a cooling rack. So now we can finish our coffee cake in a few different ways. You can say done, beautiful as is, and people will go crazy for this. It is so good, just like this. But if you want to add a little extra touch, you can add an optional glaze that's really simple to stir together, but it kind of holds the crumbs on there and gives it another visual element. Or you can dust it with a little bit of non-melting sugar or confectioner sugar for this like snow-covered kissed look. So I'm going to show you how to make the optional glaze. You'll need powdered sugar or confectioner sugar, just a pinch of cinnamon, and we'll use about 2 to 3 teaspoons of water to mix it together until it's a consistency that's similar to molasses or honey. So pretty thick. We want to be able to drizzle it over the cake, and since it's still warm, it will melt just ever so slightly. So our glaze is the right consistency, and so now I'm just going to drizzle it evenly over the cake. You could put this on a serving platter before this step if you want to keep your cooling rack nice and clean. I'm going to try to keep the glaze on the cake to prevent drips. This coffee cake looks delicious. It is glazed. We've got some gorgeous little drips coming down the side. I can see the filling poking through the edges so that you know this is a filled coffee cake even from a distance. So all that's left to do is slice it, pour myself a cup of coffee, and dive in. I'll show you what a cross section looks like once we do. So we've sliced up our fresh coffee cake, and it looks so gorgeous. I love the way this filling is so striking. You can see that you're gonna get this fudgy layer of flavor in between these 2 layers of cake. The topping has lots of little nooks and crannies. The glaze has sunk into them, and it's gonna hold all of those crumbs on top so that when you take a slice, you get it all. It's such a great dish to serve at brunch, or if you have it on a regular weekday, it's going to make any day feel super special. So now all that's left to do is to have some coffee, have some coffee cake, and enjoy. Make sure you like and subscribe so we can teach you how to become an even better baker. And thanks for watching.